I'm the dude who wears flip-flops like 300 days out of the year. It just kind of fits my lifestyle, and it worked for me. And it's honestly, it is kind of what I wanted it to be when I was a kid. I'm not driving Vipers around on like Sunset Boulevard like I thought I would be.
Hey, thanks for listening. Last week I mentioned that I started a new book. I was glib in my emotions about leaving the previous book and series behind. Turns out it is hard to put away something you've worked on for years. I mean, 5+ years. It doesn't just get shelved and that's that, or at least it doesn't for me at this moment. I'm not changing my mind. Those feelings come up. I came across a bunch of these papers that I had meant to put into a box with the other papers for the last book. So it was a little bit of looking at it. Some of it was the absolute original stuff I had jotted down on the computer a long time ago. So it was a little bit of a moment. The writing's coming along for the new book. I'm pretty excited. I've got it dug into the prose on Saturday, which is of course not the best day because the weekends I don't get that much time to write, but I still muddled through, wrote every day. It feels good to be back in the manuscript. If you missed or you don't subscribe to my newsletter, you can check it out. I wrote about the new book and the reasoning of switching over. So you can check that out through Substack. You can go tojalexmorrissey.com. There's a link to the Substack there. You can search J. Alex Morrissey on Substack. You can find a link to it through Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram. So you can find it. Trust me. Next week, I will be off skiing, so I'm not going to post an episode. Enjoy this one, and then I'll be back the following week. Until then, listen to today's episode with Ryan Cody. Ryan is a comic book creator, a colorist, and a showrunner. He has a comic convention in Arizona, in Phoenix, called ASCAF, which stands for Arizona Comic Art Fair. Ryan is a friend of a few friends and reached out and asked if he could come on and talk about the show. And we talked about his career. We talked about all sorts of kind of stuff about being a freelance artist and creator. The show he's putting together sounds great. We're not 2,000 miles away. I might consider going, but I'm excited to see how it takes root in the community out there. Oh, before I let you go, we were chatting about conventions before we started really getting into it. So that's kind of how it tails into the conversation. So, and please like and share this on whatever platform you listen to, because it helps so much. Without further ado, this is me with Ryan Cody. All this scintillating convention conversation actually has purpose because you run a convention.
I do.
Yeah. And so you run, I like to call it ASCAF, but that's
what I call it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So that's the Comic Art Fair. What made you, just like I would ask anybody getting in the comic business, what made you take that choice?
Well, it's twofold. Is I wanted the shows in Arizona now, the two big shows. The Tucson Comic Con used to be in November, which was perfect. But after COVID, they got a chance to get Labor Day weekend, I believe it is. So they took that. So now the Tucson show is at the beginning of September, or whenever Labor Day is, maybe end of September. I'm not an intelligent person, but either way, it's hot now during the Tucson show, and it used to be cool. Used to be a sweater show. Now it's a shorts and t-shirt show. And the big Phoenix show, Phoenix Fan Fusion, is always Memorial Day weekend, so it's always like 105 to 110 for that show. And I just wanted people who come out, other creators who come out. It's the worst time to be coming to Arizona is in May, and
Right.
it's in because nobody wants to go anywhere. Like the the convention or the hotel restaurant and bar, that's all great, but that's not the best part about like downtown Phoenix, which is where I live. But no one wants to walk 10 minutes in any direction to go to a better place because it's 105 degrees out or something like that. And so I thought we have a huge amount of local professionals here. You mentioned Nick Cagnetti, he's from Phoenix. So we have a pretty good group here, and I wanted to kind of celebrate that, but also celebrate the weather. So I thought like we should have a cold weather show. There used to be one in the valley. It was here for a couple of years, and then it went away. Um, so one, I wanted to showcase Phoenix and our local community and our local creators with the great weather we have for 4 months of the year, and then also kind of uh, do different than what the two big pop culture shows here do, which is media guests. Um, they focus on like more like cosplay and contests and panels
Hmm.
and a lot of stuff
Yeah.
that isn't really comics based. And I wanted to put the focus back on comics and back on creators. So this was kind of something I started, and I've been fiddling with it for like a decade. I used to put on an event called, or I guess I still do, called the Arizona Comic Mini Expo, and I do tie that into Free Comic Book Day. So
Okay.
we try to bring out a national guest on Free Comic Book Day, and we do it at Samurai Comics, and they have four stores in the valley. And so I would have all the local guys there, plus like one or two national guests, and that kind of like, oh, maybe I can turn this into something that's not, hinged with Free Comic Book Day. And so that's kind of where the idea started. Like I just crunched some numbers, and I decided like let's just see how it goes. And the first year was great, so we're gonna do a second year, see how that goes. And
Cool.
and it's just all. So have you been to Heroes Con in Charlotte?
Oh yeah, of
Okay,
course.
yeah. So that's kind of my model is Heroes mixed with a little bit of like some European shows that really showcase creators. So that's kind of what my idea for it is, like a mix between like a Lake Como and a Heroes, where we don't have media guests, ticket prices are relatively cheap, parking is free, and it's just kind of an old school convention vibe. Like it's not pretentious. It's just sort of, there's no special packages, VIP packages. I'm not saying we're against that if we got the right guest, but we're not aiming for that. We're not trying to upsell any packages to meet a specific person. We're trying to sell an experience of where there'll be upwards of 70 creators in the room, upwards of 20 professional guests in the room, and some really cool like retailers who are going to offer some cool stuff. That's kind of what we're aiming for. And then also a good hang for the weekend. It's a 1 day show. Most shows, pardon me if I'm going on too long here, most shows are 3 day shows when they should be 1 day shows. Um,
Right.
most I've been to a show, a really great show in Sioux Falls, SuperCon, but it's smaller than it's like a third of the Phoenix Comic Con land size, and it's a 3 day show. And in my experience, those kind of shows should be 1 day shows. I understand why they're weekend shows because you're renting the convention center for a week at a time. You're going to want to make your money back. But we're available to rent a venue for 1 day. And so why not make it a 1 day show? But guests can come and stay. That's kind of our pitch is like, come out for the 1 day show, stay the weekend. If you want to hang out, we'll hang out all weekend. If you want me to leave you alone and you go travel into northern Arizona, like we had some guests last year who drove up to Sedona the next day, and it's kind of like we can't offer them the money that like a megacon or something can offer them, but we can tell you like we get you a nice hotel and then you can explore Arizona if that's something you want to do. And it's a weekend experience with only a 1 day commitment for the creator.
Yeah. It's so interesting because there's so many variables engaged with starting up anything and trying to scale something to what you have a vision for. And getting to see the the first year, I guess lumps that the local show here took. And I think to your point, if it was just one day, I think they would have done much better
Mhm.
because it would have been much more of an event to go, oh, yeah, that's this is it. This is the only time. But unfortunately, they ran smack dab into a larger sort of social event that was happening in Asheville that day, which just bled away, I would say, 50% of the potential people who could have come. It was just one of those real big things.
Yeah, scheduling is tough, especially you don't know, or I didn't realize how many kind of pulp culture cons there were in Arizona until you try to book one, and everyone wants to book one in the good weather, like I was saying. So the same day our event is happening, there's like a card show that also features comics, but we're not really crossing over. They don't really have many comic guests. But it's like even in what I consider kind of a small city like Phoenix, or smallish city like Phoenix, there's two or three events going on the same weekend. The weekend we're doing the show, we had to book it that weekend because the small event center that we book is booked out for the rest of the spring with like toy shows and Pokemon card shows, and there's no lack of things for people to do.
Yeah.
So what I thought would be a no-brainer, oh, a Comic Con in the great weather, let's hang out, is like, well, there's 15 other things going on and people are busy, and it's like it's yeah, it's a real eye-opening kind of thing to try to avoid all the little library cons, all the little store-specific events. You don't want to. I want the whole all the retailers in the valley to come and kind of rally around us to celebrate comics, but they're also running their own businesses. Like I had one retailer tell me, like, well, one retailer was like, well, I don't normally send people to other places to buy their comics, because when I said, oh, do you want to like promote our show for help us promote our show, and he's like, why would I send someone outside of my store to go spend money somewhere? And I was like, okay, I get that on a business level, but we're trying to build a community here. We're not a giant show. We're a small kind of grassroots show, and we're trying to build it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and it's tough. I mean, if people are, yeah, I think it's like there's a territorial nature to businesses. These people don't want to have anybody infringe on their pull list people and et cetera and so forth. So it's hard for them to want to get together, to sort of get together, because they're not intrinsically linked in that sense. So when there's a New York Comic Con, a San Diego Comic Con, a Heroes Con, or any of the big ones, these companies are traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles to go there because they know there's a huge, purchasing audience that is going to come in and they're looking for stuff. And that is an incentive. On a smaller scale, I think it's a disincentive for a lot of
Right.
these people. Um,
Yeah, and one thing we ran into, you learn things from year to year. One thing we did in year one was we actually had sponsorships where stores, who wanted to support us more would be a sponsor, and we'd put them on the poster and we'd promote them and all this stuff. And then we quickly realized that there were some stores who didn't want to get a booth. That's not just what their business model is, not just to go set up at shows, but they also weren't going to hang a poster or carry our flyers because they had the logo of another comic book store on them.
yeah.
So then year two, we're not having store specific sponsors, and more stores are carrying our posters and stuff like that. But yeah, like I said, it's just a hard, like in my naive brain, I was like, oh, why wouldn't every time they sell a comic, they would tell somebody about our store and tell them they should get tickets to our show and all this stuff. And then you quickly realize, like, man, that guy running the register that at that moment has 15 other things on his mind. He's not,
Hmm.
it's not his boss telling him to promote their store. It's some random guy who just thought we would all be in this together. And for a lot of the community, we are all in it together. But there are, I quickly realized, like, they they can't possibly care as much as I want them to care about it, because they're running businesses and they're managing employees and they're worried about their own bottom line and promoting their own events. And it's a whole new, and I was never like a marketing guy or anything like that. So to me, every year is like I'm learning new stuff every year. And if I can keep this going, maybe like in a decade, I'll have it like dialed in perfectly, if that's possible.
You could also, I would try to, if you can start gathering data on the vendors who you do have and find out how they did. And you don't it doesn't have to be specific to that thing saying so and so did this well, but what you can do is you can start generating statistics and
Right.
have data sets that support this idea. And then when you do talk to these, places that maybe don't want to participate at this moment, then they go, oh geez, I could make a good bump, in a soft quarter and get, pull stuff, but I mean, like you said, it requires an infrastructure on their end. They need to have long boxes ready to go. They need to have, two or three people dedicated to being there for the weekend. I mean, there's a whole bunch, transportation,
Yeah.
et cetera, and so forth. And if you don't have that, that investment goes, well, how much is this worth to me? Because they're not going to do it for just your show. This is the thing where they go have to say, okay, I have to do this for 5 shows, 10 shows a year to make this make money for me, which is a
Right.
different business.
Yeah, and each retailer kind of treats it differently. I have some retailers who are buying like 3 booths and they're going to have a whole setup and it's a big thing for them. And then I have other retailers who are like, "Oh, I got these dollar comic bins. Let me just lug those down there and just try to unload." Like I think last year we had some retailers just selling like you could buy the whole long box. You can buy a long box of comics. It's like a mystery box for like $20, you know? Like they're just trying to clear space at their store and maybe hand out business cards or bring this flyer in next time you're in our shop. It's kind of like self promotion, but they can get rid of some of their quarter books or their dollar books.
Mm.
And then you also have people who are bringing like copies of like X-Men #1 or whatever they think someone's going to have, and maybe there is that one collector that has the money for it at that show. So it is interesting to see how each kind of person who gets a retailer or a vendor table, how they approach it and what they're trying to get out of it. And like I said, I'm friendly with a few local retailers, and I think a lot of them, for them, they're doing it for me. They want to support this kind of endeavor,
Hmm.
so they're willing to break even or maybe even lose a little bit. Like there's a retailer from Northern Arizona that comes down. He's got to get a hotel and he's got to do all this other stuff. So I understand some of it is supporting me, and then some of it is just all like business, business, business. And hopefully we can grow to a point where it's again mutually beneficial and also kind of in the middle. Like let's support an arts event, and the bottom line doesn't have to be about money. That's kind of what I'm because that's why you get media guests who because they're going to sell tickets, or that's why
Hmm.
a lot of creators now have agents and they have minimums they make and they get paid to be at shows and stuff like that. And it's because it's such a business. And I think everyone should make their money, especially creators who have no retirement plan and no 401k. They should get paid when they can get paid. But
Yeah.
also, I'm not in a position to be able to pay those guys anything yet. So I also kind of want to you do me a favor, and maybe in 10 years when I can give you money to come out for a show, then we bring you back out or something like that. Like let's all grow together to get to a point where we can all be happy after the show grows. So that's kind of my thought behind behind the show.
Yeah. And I think it's, we're in this really interesting period. You brought up all these points of, the entertainment guests and um, cosplay guests and many other types of interests that people have, anime. And, this is, socially way out there. Like this, you reel the clock back 20, 30 years, no one could have envisioned this. Nobody could have. Like people, even people who were running comic conventions would go like, boy, if we could get 25,000 guests for a whole weekend here in New York City, we're we're gonna be golden, you know. And now it's like, how do we handle 250,000 people?
Right.
And all this attention has been focused on it, and we know where it comes from. It comes from the movies, the video games, and cartoons. Like that's where we're getting all this attention, turned. The eye of Sauron has aimed itself at all this sort of niche entertainment. But to your point, like it would be really great if we can elegantly and gracefully build something when we kind of know this won't last forever. Like this stuff never lasts forever. We don't. It's a trend, and it's a healthy trend, but it may not be a permanent thing. It just
Mhm.
could be, we could be on the down arc. We don't know. I mean, emotionally, I think we're on the down arc even with the Marvel movies. I don't think they have the same sort of social gravitas they did five, plus years ago.
Right.
So I think, if we can look at it, I was talking with someone on the show recently about the idea that there's this huge, middle grade and young, YA market for graphic novels right now, but there's
Mhm.
no, there's no market for graphic novels beyond that age group.
Right.
It's just, well, then I guess you're just going to have to go buy a Marvel graphic novel,
Right.
which not denigrating that, but they are nothing alike. When you're writing stories about like people, and then you're writing stories about people with powers. Very different.
Right, like, I've always thought, and I think I don't remember who the publisher was, whether it was Oni or somebody, but maybe like a decade ago, they tried to do these adult manga-sized kind of black and white graphic novels. Chris Somney and Andy Parks did one, and I wanna think, like, Brian Hurt and maybe Cullen Bunn did one, and it's kinda geared towards that, like, adult who doesn't wanna read superheroes, who grew up
Hmm.
on manga, to still be able to feel comfortable, like, reading their comics on the subway or in the train, or try to make them more acceptable like they are in other countries. And it still kind of surprises me that that's not a bankable business model in publishing today. Like why isn't Darwin Cook's Hunter graphic novels available in manga size, you know formats?
Dude, I mean, this is a question that has been in my head for, I don't know, 30 years easily. uh, how do we go on? And like, and this is not anything against superheroes. I cut my teeth on superheroes. I love superheroes. And there's something magical about superheroes, but there's more than just superheroes. The anime people, the cosplay people, the whatever, the game people, et cetera, and so forth. And I don't think that they're the same audience. I think that, I sat at my table and I watched cosplay kids in these fantastic costumes, having a great time. No eyes did they ever turn at a comic book creator's table or a comic book
Right.
selling vendor. Never.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Is if I mean, there it's a wide base of similar interests, but it's not the same, like you're saying. Like if someone's going and buying the ticket package to get their photo taken with Jensen Ackles, they're not buying your buddy's indie comic, like black and white zine down on the sales floor. That's not what they're going there
Mhm.
for. So it is kind of, so that's kind of what we're focusing on. Is And then what we noticed in year one, obviously our attendance numbers weren't close to any of the other conventions that I've ever been to. I mean, this is like an old school, like hotel lobby convention almost, is kind of what we're doing. 100 tables is all that can fit in this auditorium that we do our show at. But everyone was buying stuff, and it's because parking was free. Tickets were People weren't buying memberships for the weekend, they're buying tickets to the event, and the tickets were cheap, and parking was free, and people just had money to spend. I mean, even shows that are great and shows that do their best for comics, and to do their best to showcase creators and showcase comics, they're still charging a family of four well over $100 for a single day, plus parking downtown,
Yeah.
plus food and all that stuff. Like where we're at right now, the food is cheap, the parking is free, the tickets are like $15. Like it's and we felt that the people who were there selling things. The way I tell people is, if you do shows and you normally do well, you would do really well at our show. If you're a really niche indie guy and you struggle at Phoenix Fan Fusion, you're going to struggle at my show. It's not magically going to make your sales get better, but your sales are going to be on par with a huge show for a 1 day commitment with a much more relaxed environment. People people engage more because you don't have these long lines where they're just rolling people over and rolling people over. It's not photo ops. People are chatting with fans are really getting time to spend with these creators. I'm not going to say his name, but one of our guests is a very well known creator, does a lot of shows. him and his wife were telling me like, oh, this is the most fun we've had at a show in a long time, because they're not here just to get their slabbed book signed. They're here to talk to
Hmm.
this creator and tell this creator how much that work meant to them, and to maybe get an art, a little head sketch, or a print or something like that. And it's not a bunch of people just flipping their graded books or whatever. It's real comic fans talking to real comic creators. And the feedback last year was overwhelmingly positive. We just want to try to grow it. And I wish all the shows kind of had, like, going back to Heroes, like, for a long time, their guest coordinator or their guest liaison is a comic creator, or was a comic creator for many years. And I think
Yeah.
that's one reason why so many pros, like a lot of pros who won't who usually get travel and everything for shows, they pay their own way to go to Heroes because it's such an amazing show and such an amazing weekend and stuff like that. And that's the vibe I wanted to create, essentially, was, yeah. And I've told Rico this, like, this is what I want. I want to do what you do, and
Yeah.
I want to build something like what Heroes has. It's a great example for me. Yeah.
It's also that, like, I mean, and you pegged it, I think, is the barrier to entry. If you can lower the barrier to entry to most anything in the world, I think you're going to get you can get a greater return if the quality of the experience is good. I've always felt that, like, you see people like, oh, well, I charge whatever for this thing. I'm like, well, if you did something, if you could do that and cut the price down, I think you'd sell more units. Like, if you can figure a way to lower your cost of good and get that thing out there, you're going to get a higher number, and that is going to shoot your overall numbers way up.
Yeah, and it's a big show that's a big money show. It's all treated almost like a spectacle. Like, the attendees should just be happy that they have the chance to go to this show. Where I want our creators to feel like happy to be there, to then talk to the fans who are also happy to be there. And it's a mutual kind of just overwhelmingly positive vibe. It's not all about money, even though people are making money, and it's not all about the hard sale, and it's not, it's not someone paid $500 for their small indie booth, and they gotta push sales as much as possible because they got to make that money back or it's a loss. Like, our tables are super affordable, super cheap, and it allows kind of a relaxed environment throughout the whole room. Like, it really, like I said, last year almost everyone had something in their hands. And if you go to a big
Yeah,
show, if you've been at a big show and you spend time there, a lot of people are walking around with nothing in their hand. And it's because they have a certain amount of money they can spend, because the rest of it went to something else. So they're all looking for that perfect thing, rather than, oh, I'm going to take a chance on this book I've never seen. I really like it. Let me take a chance on it because I have the extra money on me. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I mean, you're speaking the language, and and I, I like hotel lobby conventions. I
Yeah.
mean, like, so I lived in New York City for 25 years, and the majority of the time that I was going to shows, and I'm talking either as a fan or as a tabling creator, they were in the hotels. It's nuts, but those to me those shows are fantastic because there's I don't know, maybe there's a bit of charm
Hmm.
to these shows that take place in these not sort of purpose built, giant locations, which cost a ton of money, like a ton of, like, the hotel's making money. They're already making money. There's people staying in the hotel. They already make their dough. Like,
Right.
this is a gravy business. The convention center, they got to put people into that convention center to make their money.
Yeah. And the way I was talking about kind of grassroots, like trying to, educate's not the right word, but sort of like involve fans, involve retailers. It's also involving creators, because I want creators to get back into that, like, kind of, we're all in this together. Like, when I first started doing shows and artist alley at tables, it was sort of like, it's us against the world. We're all banding together. We're all trying to, like, make it in this business. And now a lot of people are making it in this business, but I still like that camaraderie, that kind of like, yeah, we're in this, we're doing this. And that's the kind of vibe, I noticed at Heroes. And it's kind of vibe I noticed at my show last year was, because I had to tell the guests that came in, who are used to getting, like, banquet lunches served every day at lunch and a volunteer to come sit at your table so you can go sit in the green room for an hour and rest. We don't have that. So like, but no one even said anything about it. I just told them like, hey, think of it as like, again, like a really small show. Maybe when you were first starting out like
Mhm.
and everyone I felt like just was having a good vibe that way. And then as this, as every show gets slow. So if you do a 3-day show, it's going to get real slow on Sunday. If you do a 1-day show, it's going to get real slow at like 3:30, 4 in the afternoon. And that's when I started noticing like people getting up from their tables and then they're doing their shopping or then they're going to see their friends. And it became a real kind of really neat, like collaborative, fun, like hang while the con is still going on.
Mhm.
And I even talked to some people this year, and I was like, well, maybe we'll just end the show early this year, like, and like just have the hours close at like 4:30 or 5 because it was dead. And more than one person told me like, oh, don't do that because that's when we all just sat around and chatted. And that's
Right.
and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, that makes sense. Like it's just yeah, it's kind of the all for one kind of mentality. We're all in this together at an event like that.
Yeah, and I think it's getting the people to get like the creators together. I think that's yet, this is just an ad for Heroes Con, right?
Right.
Um,
The
it
hang is the point is kind of what I think.
right.
Yeah.
My memories sitting at a table, smiling, drawing, signing autographs, whatever the thing is, they're great. And there's nothing more, you know, ego stroking than, doing those kinds of things.
Right.
But those aren't my favorite memories.
Right.
Like my favorite memories are spending time with friends, making a new friend,
Hmm.
like bumping into someone and next thing you know, you're the best friends in the world because
Yeah.
you have this stupid, thing that you both like to do, which is draw silly pictures. And that you'll always look back and go, I had the best time at that. And you will chase the dragon, which means go back to it to
Right.
try to have that recreate that sort of that magic. And
Right.
so being able to focus that and give that space to the people who are attending because let's really stick it to Jensen Ackles. I'm joking. But I don't even know. I think he's the Green Arrow guy, right?
No, the Jensen Ackles was one of the supernatural guys.
See, I don't even know. But
Yeah.
anyway, but for him, he's hopping out of town immediately.
Right.
Or, I mean, supposedly. I mean, he's
Yeah.
not, but he's certainly not going to the mixers.
Yeah. 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 He's taking his metaphorical or quite literal garbage bag full of cash and getting on the first plane out of town.
Right.
He's not. He's not available for be like, oh, do you want to get lunch tomorrow morning before your flight? He's not that guy. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. And
I love trying to draw analogies. Like my whole analogy about the comic convention thing, and this is, you know, I grew up skiing. I love skiing. It's like one of my favorite things to do. But my favorite places to ski are the places that remind me of the places I skied when I was young. Because there's no big fancy gondola and all this sort of hoo-ha and open fire pits and magical this and live that happening. It is, a wooden structure where they serve hot chocolate and beer, and you can get on a lift, risking your life to get to the top of the mountain and then risk your life on the way back down. Like that to me is the memories, and that's what I want to go do. Like I want that
right.
experience again. And I think for conventions, a lot of that is the same. Like, yes, New York Comic Con is phenomenal, but it is overwhelming. It
Mhm.
is this huge thing where you are truly fighting the masses just to move around the space. Then you go to other shows and you're like, this is great because it's just people who are here loving comic books, having a great time, and it's not too much. So,
Yeah, I think for me, going back to the whole like kind of Arrested Development sort of situations, the first show I ever did when I had no books out, we were pitching something, but somebody knew somebody, so we got into kind of a row of like young image creators, and we were kind of hanging out with them all weekend. And I just remember getting home, and I'm like, haven't even really made a comic, but if this is what conventions is like, this is what I want to do. We did karaoke. We made like a family dinner. We all like had like a bunk style sleepover in someone's garage. I'm like, this is amazing. I went to a house party and like met Jim Mahfood and hung out and all this other fun stuff, right? Like I'm like, this is amazing. I want to do this all the time. And then I quickly realized most shows are not like that. Like it's that was and but yeah, that's the dragon I'm chasing is and all of this honestly, if I break everything down to why I put on events, it's for the hang. If I could find a way to monetize, if I could get Wacom and Marvel and DC to just fund creative summits for creators with no editorial input or no publishers or
Yeah.
anything like that, that would be it. I want to sit around, I want to talk storytelling, and I want to sit around and look at. We had a drink and draw the other night to promote our event, and one of the local art collectors brought a portfolio. So we're flipping through his portfolio, like fawning over all these original pages he has in there. Like that's what I want. I mean, that's the whole goal of it. Um, the convention itself is secondary to facilitate bringing this stuff together, But I do love people who come to the show. Trust me.
Well, you know, but it's well, two things off of that. One, so I went to the Nebula conference last year, which is for science fiction authors. So I went to this in LA, and it 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 was only people who wrote, and then agents, and then the people who ran the conference. So there were no. I mean, I was about as touristy in that situation as anyone gets. But I mean, there are these, you know, top tier a number one, science fiction authors and fantasy authors doing their thing, and but there's nobody running around asking for autographs. It was all just the creators doing creator stuff, sitting around eating food, talking about the craft, and et cetera and so forth. And then it's just a panel discussion after panel discussion. So you could just go from room to room and kind of engage that way. So I'd love it if there was something like that. I mean, the thing is that would mean that you'd have to get some sort of sponsorship, but you would also have to get the creators to pony up their own cash to be a part of this, because the mindset of this now is this is a business. This weekend is going to generate a certain amount of income for me versus I'm going to get to go to spend time in the city and have a good time with my friends, which is
Right.
what it really was for a very long time.
Yeah, and it's also to convince, comic creators who already do a lot of shows and already do a lot of commitments and store signings and stuff like that to be like, oh, let's add another weekend onto your schedule that you're away from your wife and kids and or your husband and your children and you're away from your partners who you're already gone
Hmm.
20 weekends a year. Let's add another one on there just so we can all just hang out without the commitment of a convention. Like I don't know if that would ever happen unless again a big sponsor came up and just said like everyone who comes here gets a flat fee. We're going to cater your meals. Like that's that would be hard to come by, and for someone like me, I would never be invited to that show unless I put on that show. So, so it's like my dream would be something I would have to manifest, and I don't think I
Which
have
is
the
not a
grant.
bad thing.
I don't have that. I don't know if I have the grant writing skills to get $50,000 investment or something like that. But
I don't
that
think you don't have to you don't have those skills. You have to have the idea, and then you speak to the person, and then you have the person who has the skills to actually execute that. And that's all it
right?
takes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I mean, it would be it would be an interesting experiment to try to develop that idea, and then if you could graft it onto a convention and
Well,
somehow
yeah.
pull that off where you can go, hey, like a San Diego being an example, like it starts on what, Wednesday, but like maybe Thursday is that day, and that's when the creators get to have the getaway.
Yeah, I think there might be a show like that, or I could be confusing it. I think some publishers do that on a day before. There is a show that has a day, but it might be more for retailers and stuff like that. Like they tour you around the city, and they maybe I'm thinking of like Comics Pro or something like that, like a
Right.
retailer specific event. But yes, again, I've thought of that too. And then once again, you'd have to have a really dedicated convention to do that because they're renting that spot for a week. That's why
Sure.
that's why San Diego is Wednesday through Sunday, and for a while Phoenix was I think Wednesday through Sunday for a couple of years till they realized like we don't need to be a 4-day convention plus a preview night. Um, but I get it. I mean, they're just burning money those other 3 days. They might as
Oh,
well.
for sure.
Um, but yeah, that would be great. And that's kind of, again, like you said, free ad for Heroes. That's kind of what the Heroes Dead Dog Party is. You
Yeah,
you go
yeah,
through the whole weekend. You stay out late, you get up early, and so you can have that Sunday night. And that's why everyone books the first year I did Heroes, I booked like a 9 o'clock flight on Sunday, and someone was like, "What are you doing?
yeah.
Like, you don't even want a Monday morning flight, man. You want a Monday afternoon flight." And I was like, "So yeah,
No, no, it's totally true. Of course, now we've given away the secret to people who don't know.
sure." Yeah, yeah. You were talking earlier about conventions becoming too big and too much, and that's kind of how I feel about San Diego. Like, I haven't been to San Diego since 2009, and I
Yeah.
mean, I only had like one or two indie books out before that, so I've done bigger work since that. But again, no one, for the biggest books I work on, or I color them, and DC is not going to give a colorist of a mini series a signing slot at their booth at San Diego,
Right.
right? So it doesn't make sense for me to do all that. I would like to, again, I would like to go for the hang, but I can't afford a hotel room for even one night for the hang, at San Diego Comic Con, unless I'm sleeping on floors, and I'm getting a little too old for that. So it's, yeah, the big cons are fun, but they're just not for me. I can't. It's too much.
Yeah, it's it's expensive. The whole thing is it's an expensive endeavor regardless, and I get it. And there's a lot of great opportunities out there on the creative side to go to all these different shows because lots of shows they want a sort of a new fresh kind of group every year along with the sort of the core people they keep. And but it's a gamble now. It's a gamble. So I don't know. I mean, I love the idea that creating this. You've created this show, which is sort of a back to the essence of a comic convention, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, we even had for year one there was a local store they do CGC stuff, and kind of like they bring guests in for one day signings and stuff like that, and they offered to bring in an actor who was on like some show on Netflix or something like that. And they were like, "Well, we're bringing him in for a signing the day after your show, so you could just have him as a guest at your show, and you give us like our table for free, or I don't know, I don't remember how they wanted to work it." And I just said no, like no, no, like I understand he's essentially a free media guest, but that will, like, when I wrote down my initial notes for what I want ASCAF to be, that's one of the first foundational rules is no guest who doesn't work on in comics.
Hmm.
So, like, if next year Patton Oswalt wanted to come out, yeah, Patton writes comics. I'll be happy to
Yeah.
have Patton out because he writes comics. Or Dan Fogler, who I met at a show once. I mean, he's written comics, so they at least have written a comic or have worked in a comic, and it's not just oh yeah, they're on this TV show that's sort of not even comic related, but pop culture related. Um, and so that's just one of the rules is like you got to make comics, and then we curate our show because it's only, like I said, it's only a max of 100 tables, so we're not like a regular con where anyone can just log online and buy a table. I curate the tables, and one of the major criteria is you got to make comics. I'm trying not to be too, I got to be a little gatekeeperish because we have limited tables, and I also want to make this in a boutique style premium kind of event experience. um, So I gatekeep a little bit, but I try not to. But if someone's out there making zines and they're making the comic and they're working in comics and not just doing the occasional sketch cover or something like that, they're in. I mean, I'm not gonna. They're doing the work and they're passionate about comics, and that's what's important to me. Is are you passionate about comics, or are you a graphic designer who wants to make a comic, or are you a novelist who wants to write comics? That's not the same thing as someone who makes comics. And I guess I am going to be a little gatekeeper in that field, and that's kind of a weird position to be in. And I've kind of struggled with it a little bit because I don't I think people already assume that I'm kind of grumpy and not super friendly, and that doesn't help. But I'm also not just going to let anybody buy a table so they can sell like their earrings or whatever. You know.
When you say that, I don't. see it as a term as gatekeeping because it's more akin to fulfilling a promise. And the promise that you make, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but the promise is you promise the people who are coming here who are comic book fans that they are going to be able to spend a day with comic book creators. And that's it. That's it. Straight up, no, nothing more. Like I, so last year I'm staying there at Heroes and I'm talking to friends, whatever. And every year people go, why don't you have a table? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. But like, I'm like, listen, I haven't been in the business as an artist in over 20 years. So who wants to sit, who wants to come up at a table and look at a bunch of old artwork? And the person I was talking to just kind of like swung their finger all the way around and said like, well, literally everybody here in this building is that's why they're here. They're
Right.
here to look at artwork, whether it's new or old. That's what they do. And I was
Right.
like, oh, you're right.
Right.
But it was one of those kind of weird moments because I viewed it as currently making, currently doing is the value versus the value of the legacy of it or whatever the thing is, or and the relationship you have with the subject. And it doesn't, and to your point, it doesn't diminish that graphic designer who wants to make a comic book or that author who wants to write a comic book. It doesn't. This is great, but to fulfill the promise to the people who are paying you money to come in is that they're going to walk up and they're going to be able to buy a comic book from nearly every single person sitting at a table in that
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, and that's kind of the goal. Like there are some people who are really good illustrators and maybe they're sketch cover artists or something like that, or maybe they do store specific covers. But I'm like that doing a cover for a store, you're not making the comic, you're drawing an illustration. And there's nothing wrong with that too. We have some
Nope.
illustrators that are great. Um, but again, maybe the bar's a little higher. Like if you're at my show and you're strictly an illustrator, you're going to be a really good illustrator. Or there's even a little bit of conceit in there that's like, oh, I know you personally and you're a good person. You do good work and you've been supportive of me in the past. I'm supportive of you now. Like there's always going to be that too. Like I got my guys. And that term's been thrown back at me kind of in a negative way before. Like, oh, you got your guys. You gotta expand past your guys. And I'm like, I'm willing to do that, but they're always going to be my guys because they're good people, they're good creators, and I just want them around when we do these events. I want these people around me because I know that they're good people. They do great work. Like they're so, again, I talk about the Phoenix community. We got people, lots of people who work on Image books, Oni books, DC books, Marvel books. Like we have a huge. I mean, we're not Portland, but we're pretty good. I mean, we got a lot of pros in the valley, and we do good work, and they're good people, and I'm always going to have them. So even maybe they haven't had a book out in 3 years. It doesn't matter to me. They're going, they're there. Um, yeah, I just want to be around good people who do good work that I personally know are good people that do good work.
Yeah.
And it's also something it's one less thing I have to worry about. I know, there's a local guy, Jim Hanna. I know Jim's good with people. I know Jim does fun work and Jim's good with people and people like Jim Hanna. He's at the show. Shout out to Jim Hanna. Like that kind of thing. Like to me, it's a no brainer. I'm not gonna let somebody in that I don't personally know that is maybe not doing really high quality work that then I have to worry about and I don't know, I don't want to deal with that. Maybe I have to deal with that if the show gets bigger and we have 200 tables, then I definitely got to deal with that. But right now, it can be manageable, and for good or bad, I'm the person managing it, if that makes sense. Yeah. We also live in a current time, and even in comics, where you have to vet people. Like I have to, when people are buying tables at my show, or they're applying and I'm saying we'd be happy to have you, and then they're like, oh, okay, cool, I have a friend who's going to sit with me. I have to be like, okay, who's going to be sitting with you? Do you have a link to their work? Like it's like you
Yeah.
have to vet. As bad as it is, like even at a small show, you have to vet everyone that's going to be at your show, because I don't want to have a problem at the end of the day or during the day. And
You mentioned earlier about sort of the punk rock lifestyle of your first convention.
Mhm.
Crashing in a bunkhouse kind of garage setup and hanging out with the food.
Right.
What book were you working on at that time?
So I was pitching a book. This is funny. It's a little segue. I had a note. I listened to a couple of your episodes. I had a note that I made a mention of because it rang true for me. But I was pitching a book to Image called Hurricane Kids. It was like just like a superhero book, and this was back when Eric Larson was still the publisher before Stevenson. And I think it was Cullen Bunn's episode where he said like he getting into comics was easy. Like he got his first comics job kind of easy, or his first book got published. So the first book I pitched was this book. Eric Larson, he liked it, and then we actually went back and forth. I got like a Christmas card from Image that year. I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But it finally ended. He's like, I don't know how I'm going to sell this. Like, unless you're invincible, this ain't going to sell. And so that went on for like 9 months of whether we're going to publish this book or not. And then during that time, I pitched another book. There used to be a publisher called Viper Comics out of Texas. Published another book, or I pitched another book with Viper. Viper picked it up. So my first book was currently chatting with Eric Larson about whether they're going to publish it. This next book I pitched got picked up, released, and then got optioned. So I was just like, oh, indie comics are easy. Like, what is everyone
It's a
complaining about?
breeze.
Like, this is a breeze. Like, I'm on the Image. I'm getting Christmas cards from Eric Larson. I'm getting, like all this money from like Sony or whoever optioned it. Like, I'm like, this is great. And then, it's been a dry spell ever since as far as indie comics go. But yeah, that's kind of like I just thought it was easy, and it wasn't.
No.
But back then it kind of was easier. If you remember back in like '06, '07, when Speakeasy Comics was around, there were a lot of indie publishers publishing really good stuff, and everything was getting option. Like if you sneezed onto an indie comic, you were getting an option somehow. So I think I came in at the right time, but I just didn't have the staying power, and I'm not narcissistic enough or anything to understand. I know why I didn't keep working in indie comics, and I did. I mean, I've been working in comics for like 20 years, but it's always on like corporate stuff or small pitch stuff or Kickstarter stuff, not like a career. Um, and it wasn't until much later that I started coloring books at like Image or DC or stuff like that. Like this was so long into the career. Um, but yeah, it was a book called Hurricane Kids, which I thought was great. I still have an email. Like everyone has that embarrassing email, so one of my email addresses is still tied to that pitch project. And um, but yeah, it was fun. I mean, man, comics was fun in '05, '06, '07. I wish I would have been a little older. So I could or more into the industry. So I really could have been involved at that time rather than just be that kind of a hanger on. But
It's so hard, man, with the perspective of looking at everything that I didn't see, in my formative years of the business. It's just boggling. I'm like, how did I not see what is so obvious today? What I should what I all I had to do was just do this, and that would have been fine. And because for me it was easy too. Like I mean, no, I mean, it's not that I didn't work hard. I worked hard for nearly 2 years, but I was in college. I had the cushion of not having to do anything but do this, and I did that, and I got out and I got hired right away. Boom. Okay, so now I'm at Marvel. That was it. But I didn't understand like how that business worked. So I just thought like, okay, well, now I'm in, everything's fine, right? And it took a long time to figure out that that wasn't the case.
yeah, you think that or at least I thought like, oh, I'll just do like one indie book a year. I'll keep my day job. I'll do one indie book a year. It'll get optioned for 20 grand. And then we'll just
Right.
build off this. I'll be Kirkman without being Kirkman. Basically, I'll just be getting all this option money and stuff. And then I quickly realized like, oh no, like now Eric Larson's not returning my emails about another pitch or something like that. I was like I was just so naive, and I was like, oh well, he knows me now. And I've hung out with Eric. I brought Eric out for a show. I've spent weekends driving him around and hanging out with him. and then I see him at Heroes and I talk to him, and I always got to reintroduce myself. And that's not a him thing. I mean, he meets hundreds of people at every convention. It's just like I quickly realized like, oh, this isn't nearly as easy as I thought it was. Oh, and actually, it's not easy at all. Like it is
Yeah.
constant hustle, and that's never changed. I mean, I've been working full time in comics for 12 years or something like that, and it's still feast or famine. I've never been one of those creators who has my next year planned out. It's always like, oh, I got too much work now. And then, oh, I don't have any work for 2 months. And it's like, it's just, it's both a young man's game, but also it's the highs and lows of it are kind of something I didn't expect when I thought I wanted to be a comic book artist. Even though people told me it's going to be hard,
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah, but you
think
don't know
about
what hard is.
it.
You have no idea what you know what I mean? Like because you can't easily say here's how it hard is going to be because everybody's heart is different.
Right,
You are fighting for your life every time you pick up your, tool of destruction, whatever that thing is.
right.
It's a very hard thing to say to someone, hey, like the most, I remember one of my editors goes like, all right, like take half that money and put that in the bank, save that money. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like because he knew you're not gonna have work next month, and you need to make sure that
Right.
you can spread this out. I've said this recently. We judge ourselves on the successes,
Hmm.
not on the struggles we see around us. It is about hustling and doing the work. Like you need to hustle and do the work. And I didn't know how to hustle. I knew how to get in the door. I knew how to talk. I knew how to get to a point, but hustle isn't landing a gig. Hustle is filling that calendar out. As you said, making sure that well, back in that day, it was pick up the phone, but answer the email, keep that communication going because that is the only way that you can keep
Right.
any freelance lifestyle going.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because I mean, if I email, you know, 13 editors being like, "Hey, my schedule opens up in a month and I'm looking to fill some projects, some time." I'm one of 10 freelancers who emailed them that day. So if 5 of the 13 get back to me, and they're all going to get back to me with, "We'll keep you in mind." It's almost the same answer for all of them. I'm still thrilled that even a third of them got back to me, right?
Right.
Yeah, and that's what when people, nobody wants to hear it, but when I'm at a show or I'm on a podcast or something like that, and people ask like, "Oh, so what's your biggest advice for if I want to make comics? What's your biggest advice?" And I say, "Don't get married, don't have kids, and get live in a house with like four other people for as
Sure.
long as you can handle it, because don't the only way to break into especially indie comics, like I have as a colorist, as a freelance colorist, I have my DC rate, and then I have a fun little project from this small publisher that I would like to color with a friend of mine, and that rate is a third of my like DC rate, for example.
Hmm.
So then trying to explain that like at a dinner party with my wife and her friends that like, oh yeah, I'm going to color this book, and then I really want to work on this book, but it's going to be a 60% pay cut if I take this job. They can't wrap their heads around it. They're like, oh, but you're doing the same amount of work for 60% less. And I'm like, yeah, and that's just how it like that's how it works out if you're in the freelance indie comics kind of freelance. Marvel, DC, their rates are kind of set, but yeah, you have to be super flexible, and you have to be realistic about how much energy and work you can put into a project, and whether it's the page rate is appropriate for you. Like I've had to turn down work with guys that I want to color, creators I want to color, sorry, and it's like, well, I can't for that page rate, I can't, and I'm not
Yeah.
mad at the publisher. I've self-published my own comics. I know how expensive it can be. Like I don't ever like knock a publisher for what they're willing to offer.
Hmm.
Well, there are some publishers I can knock, but I'm not gonna. But it's just sad that like, oh yeah, I want to work with this person, but I can't do it for that. I just can't do it for that. Like that's kind of a bummer in our industry as well. Like it's kind of something you never would expect when you are a kid and you want to make comics. You don't have to worry. You don't have to think about that.
Well, the fact that everything you do is the portfolio for the next thing. So it's even hard to do the Shaquille O'Neal smile model, which is, depending on how much money said endorser would pay him, that's how big his smile would be for the ad. And like you go, oh, okay, like I get that. I mean, it's a funny way of, putting it, but
Right.
you can't take a gig and go, yeah, well, I'll just get the 50% because you don't know which publisher is going to look at that 50% and go, well, I thought they were better than this, but I guess maybe we'll look for somebody else. And
Right.
you're done at that. With their it's going to take you. You're back to zero, and you have to fight your way all the way back in with them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I've suffered from that where I've kind of been like, oh, I took this job and it's a quick job and I just wanted to I want to work with this publisher. I did that with
Mhm,
a penciling when I was still trying to get work for hire penciling work. I did a low paying job for a publisher many years ago with kind of a tight deadline, and that editor has never even returned an email since. And I thought like I was doing them a solid by knocking this issue out in 2 weeks. But I knew when I was drawing it, like, this is not a strong issue. This is not my best work, but I'm filling up
mhm.
for someone else who dropped out. So it's kind of like I thought I was doing a real solid for this publisher for a really poor rate. And then you realize like none of it was worth it. Like no one knows that I did that book. No one knows. Like no, I never signed those. They never come up to my table. It's yeah, it's not worth it really. Like you mentioned, everything needs to be a portfolio piece. And
Yeah,
if you have to rush it, I mean, it goes back to design. If I have to rush this, my you should be paying me twice as much for low quality work. If you want it that quickly, you're paying more for low quality work. Um, but yeah, and in hindsight, it didn't do me any favors. And when I thought it was going to be like my jumping off point, and that's a lesson. It's a lesson a lot of people learn. But again, I had kids. I had I started late. I had kids early, so it's tough when it's like that. You want to take any work to try to get a foothold in the industry, and it might come back to not be a positive thing.
no, listen, there's little you can do with it because I mean, I had gigs, at Marvel, and I'm doing like a 4 issue run on something, and then I get a phone call, you know, after issue one, they go, "Hey, well, the timeline's been moved forward. So we're going to need the next issue." And in the date that they gave was just completely unrealistic. It was me doing it was literally 3 pages a day to meet their deadline, which wasn't the deadline.
Right,
And I don't begrudge. I mean, like at the time, I probably was pissed off at them, but in hindsight, I'm like, no, I get it. I mean, they don't set that up; somebody else sets it up further up the food chain. So
right.
that work started off great, and then ended up looking like crap.
Yeah,
And you're like, what can you do?
yeah. It's interesting when you're talking to other professionals who have been in the business a long time, and then like there's one guy that I was talking to, and his later work was just amazing, and I was like, and we were friendly enough that I was like, man, I didn't know that you could do this kind of work. I know you from these books or whatever. And then they were nice enough to tell me, like, oh yeah, when I worked on that book, I was like 17 and I had like 2 weeks to draw it, and I was told to draw like so and so.
Right,
And I was
right.
like, and they're like, I wanted to work in comics, and this is the '90s when rates were really good. So of course you're going to take that job. So my initial opinion of them is like, oh, they're this guy.
Yeah,
And then I realized later, like, no, they were doing the best they could with what they had because they didn't want to let that opportunity slip away. And again, back then the page rates were really good. So of course you wanted
yeah,
to get that gig. It's not like now, like, oh, I don't want to let this opportunity slip away, but I'm also getting a really terrible page rate. Maybe I can let it slip away. Back then, people were like, putting down payments on cars for drawing one issue of like some Valiant comic and stuff, like it was insane.
yeah. They were
So
heady
yeah,
days,
yeah,
I would say.
yeah.
I mean, I guess to that point, I would add when you were saying the advice column, I would also add do everything you can to not be late,
Hmm.
even a minute late on the work, because that is the single largest priority to the editor. There is no greater priority.
Yeah, they They appreciate someone they don't have to worry about more than they appreciate how pretty the pages are. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, finished is better than perfect or whatever that term is. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's true. Who are the people that got you into the business? Like in the terms of like why you said you wanted to make comics.
Well, I mean, I grew up reading comics, obviously, and then, in the early '90s when Image was kind of kicking off, and you started. I always wanted to work in comics, but in the early '90s, there were so many people working in comics on so many different kind of books with so many different styles, and even back then, I could see like, oh, this person's not really that much better than me. Maybe I could work in comics, and then so then it became a reality because I'm always my harshest critic. I always like I think I'm just now currently like in the last like year getting into a comfort zone with my own drawing. Um and but back then I was like, oh, if they can draw like this, then maybe I can make it in. And then so I was like, yeah, this would be a fun job. Like I didn't know anything about it. I didn't grow up anywhere where the first time I ever went to a convention, I was like 18 and like so I didn't grow up going to conventions. I didn't have friends who drew comics. I didn't have friends who read comics. It was just me by myself. And it was sort of like, well, if they can do it and it looks like this, then I can do it. And comics are only going to get bigger and bigger because we're at this giant boom right now at this time when I'm like 17, 18.
Sure.
And then
This
so
will last forever.
yeah, so then I get to back to the I grew up overseas or I went to high school overseas. So when I get back to the States, I start sending out portfolios and I'm actually getting feedback, not jobs or anything, but they're at least replying. I'm getting a letter back or a postcard back is what a lot of the studios did was a postcard. And I was like, "Oh, I can do this." And then after like 3 or 4 of those, I realized like maybe I can't do this. Like maybe these guys that are coming up under Silvestri and Jim Lee who draw like them, I don't draw like them. So where does that leave me, right? So then I just kind of stopped collecting comics and kind of got out of it for a while. And then I went to art school when I was in my mid 20s and I had started collecting powers. And this for me
Oh,
this is a big
sure.
moment because I was like, "Oh, I kind of draw just naturally like Mike Oeming draws." And then I got more into Oeming and Bruce Timm and stuff like that and I was like, "Oh, this could be a possibility." So then I started finding people online again to pitch comics with again and that's when like again, even a little nudge like, "Oh, this kind of looks like." We weren't getting turned down. Like we didn't my first comic that I pitched didn't get turned down by Eric Larson because he didn't think the art was fine. It got turned down because he's like, "How do I sell this?" Indie hero comics don't sell. And then, of course, like I mentioned, I'd bring up Invincible, and he's like, "Well, that's the only one that sells." So, um, but at least that wasn't like you're not good enough. It was a we don't know how to package this kind of thing. And then
Right.
the next book did get picked up. I mean, obviously, there's no money in it at that point. I mean, there was when it got optioned. Ironically enough, the first full 4 issue series I drew actually made me more money than any comic I've ever done since because it got optioned multiple times. Um, and again, that is even though it didn't sell, and I know why it didn't sell because it didn't look great and stuff like that. No one told me it doesn't look good. So I was like, oh, so maybe I can kind of trudge my way into comics. And that's what I did. But it was always, I was an Image kid. Later on, as to this day, I'm a Mignola kid. Talking about Invincible, I'm a Cory Walker, Ryan Otley guy. Like those are, I'm a big superhero comics guy. Um, I thought I wanted to work in superhero comics until I started coloring superhero comics, and now I just want to do like small crime comics and stuff, like. But yeah, it was just it's. I've never really considered uh, uh not anything else. Like it wasn't something that like I feel like I got into it late in my mid 20s, but I didn't have like a real job before that. I was floating
Yeah.
around stuff. I went to art school. That was kind of a mistake, and it was just something I felt like I could get by on, and I did. And it's I've never made really great money working in comics, but my kids never starved or anything like that either. So it kind of just seemed to fit my lifestyle. Like I don't have collared shirts, I don't have slacks. I'm the dude who wears flip flops like 300 days out of the year. It just kind of fits my lifestyle, and it worked for me. And it's honestly, it is kind of what I wanted it to be when I was a kid. just with less money. I'm not driving Vipers around on like Sunset Boulevard like I thought I would be, but other than that, it's been pretty fun, and it's again, I've made a lot of really good friends. Like all my friends, I either met them before I was like 19 or I met them through comics. So
Yeah.
it's provided me a lot, uh, of intangibles that I didn't anticipate. It's been kind of fulfilling that way, and fun. And but yeah, I just love comics. I mean, when I was a kid, I'd go with my dad to the barber shop, and the barber always had Iron Man comics laying in the
Mm.
lobby, and so I'd flip through those, and then I fell in love with Chris Claremont, Alan Davis, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Dan Green, like all those great X-Men creators from like the late '80s, early '90s. And it's what I always wanted to do.
Mm. Yeah. No, I absolutely get all those impulses. I mean, I know those feelings in my version of them. They're embedded. That friendship thing. I think there's something truly special about creator communities. When you have a community of the people who do the same thing or a similar thing, there is such an excitement in sharing the joy of it, the the hassle of it. All these things are like feedback loops for us. We get really, really jazzed on that stuff. So I get it. Yeah, I had a very strange kind of shift away from comic books. It happened like in a snap of a finger kind of moment in my life. And I had this whole community that I had just kind of, I was on an island and they were on an island and we were just separating and going apart from each other. So
Right.
it was a very strange fact that doing these conversations has returned me to this
Yeah.
community in a way that I couldn't be happier about. Like it's been a phenomenal experience for me. And there's a little bit of tear of sadness of like, wow, I can't believe that I let so many of these relationships just atrophy.
Yeah, and honestly, for me, like right now, and it's and later this spring, I'll probably going to go take a day job for the first time in 20 years or whatever. And it's funny because I'm finally, when I do get freelance work from the bigger companies, I'm finally getting like a good quality rate, something I've been wanting for so long. But I'm also getting to the point where it's like, man, I'm tired of trying to stack my schedule, and it's exhausting.
Hmm.
And like, my income from week to month to month is so like, and so an opportunity came up to where I can take a design job and make a really good salary that I would never make in comics. But
Yeah.
also, I can still do my own comics, and like, so I can keep my toe in comics by doing my own comic. And if a fun freelance gig comes up, especially like a cover or something like that, like I just signed on to do four covers at DC with some creators I love, and I'm like, oh great, I can do that because I don't,
Hmm.
I can always fit in a cover, or I can always do 1.5 pages a week. I don't have to fill my schedule with maybe not the best paying freelance work, and then also try to draw my own comic on top of, like, comics almost get to become a hobby again, which is what I fell
Sure.
in them. And so I'm like, part of me is like, oh, I'm conflicted, like, oh, am I giving up on comics? Well, no, 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 I'm getting some stability here.
Hmm.
So and then I can still make my own comic. And then since I'm penciling, inking, and coloring my comic, like you said, I always have a portfolio piece. Like, oh, I'm doing new pages every week. So if I do want to pursue comics again in 6 months or a year or, whatever, I can be like, oh, yeah, this is how I color now. This is how I ink now. This is how I draw now. And maybe I get different jobs because my style is becoming more kind of uh graphic novel or OGN style or young adult style. Like I'm getting away from like big superhero action and getting more into like cartooning, which is ironic. It's what I went to school for. So I'm actually like really happy with where I'm at right now in my career, because I'm trying to build the convention. I'm trying to to make my own comics again on a regular basis rather than, oh, I made a comic 4 years ago, I made another comic this year. Like now I'm trying to produce a comic a year, 4 issue series a year. um, Everyone uses the term the Hellboy model, but that's the model. It's like the miniseries, miniseries,
Sure.
miniseries. And that's kind of what I'm jazzed about, that because now I don't have to go and force myself to color 40 pages for a low page rate for a publisher I don't really like, who may not pay me on time, for an artist I'm not jazzed about, to where I'll finally be able to like pick and choose it when an opportunity arises. If I really want to work with that person, I'll make the time to work with that person, and
Yeah.
I don't have to take all the bummer work to get to the good work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think we have a we have a picture in our head what we think something's going to be. It's you and a viper driving down Sunset Boulevard, but we rarely does that sort of vision,
Hmm.
you know, align with the reality of life. And it's like that sunk cost theory. Like you're like, well, I've stuck it out this long. I'll keep going, and meanwhile you're just like you're digging a deeper hole and you don't even see you don't because you can't see the dirt being piled up around you.
Right.
And once again we judge all our everything based on successes. They're going, yeah, but this person, they didn't, like, nobody knew what they were doing, and then all of a sudden next to the biggest thing in the world. I'm like, yeah, right, but that's like the rarity. Like I don't want to say that you're not the person who's going to do that, but also judge everything on the average and see where you land, figure it out. It's not that you're giving up on this thing. You know,
Right.
you are you're reframing it. You're giving yourself an opportunity to not be resentful
Hmm.
toward it because it's not, you know, it didn't give me a pony. Like I mean, you have to go like, this is what I'm putting into it, and this is what I get, and I'm if that makes me feel good.
Yeah, I wanted to get to the point, and it hadn't happened yet, but I could see it happening in a few years had I kept going down this, email editors try to bank jobs. And I'm first person to acknowledge, like, if I get a job from an editor for a 4 issue series and I knock it out of the park, then getting work's not really going to be a problem. I'm the first to admit like my deficiencies, that like I haven't turned in that stellar project that makes me super desirable
Hmm.
to everybody. But also, there is a comfort getting to a point where it's like, oh, if I can pay my bills and do everything through another creative avenue that might not be comics, then I can focus on me and I don't have to worry about, why isn't this editor hiring me? Because
Totally.
I'm hiring myself. And I didn't want to get to the point where I was like, why is that person getting a job and I didn't get a job? Like
Yeah.
I could color better than them. Why are they on this book? Why are they on this book? And again, you talk about the factors in there. Like, I don't know. They're probably turning projects in super early. They're working
Hmm.
weekends. Like I have certain things, like I try to keep the same hours as my wife and my family. So I don't try to work nights. I don't try to work weekends, and I'm on a message board with other colorists and they're all working weekends and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm not as committed as you because I don't want to do that. But I do want to keep telling stories, and if I make my own book, then I'm telling stories, and I can continue to, uh basically, I can experiment and I can try to work on my craft without it being like, oh, I hope someone doesn't like this, because now I'm the only person that has to like it.
Yeah.
And if I release it as a Kickstarter and it only sells, 3, 4, 500 copies, that I don't care. That's fine because I did it for
Hmm.
me. And I'm building a library for me. So in 3 years, when I am doing a bigger show like Heroes, maybe I'll have 4 volumes of my own comic out,
Right.
instead of print DC stuff I've colored, right?
Yeah, you'll have collected trades of your old man Thunder Punch, and you'll be happy,
Yeah.
and whatever else you choose to do, because yeah, I mean, it's very, it's so hard because that archetype is that person who goes and gets a gig writing, drawing, coloring for Marvel or DC and has this sort of this from the outside this amazing career as a creator. But I think there's so much more opportunity out there to
Right.
do so many more things just in the comic book world.
Yeah. And and it's a way, if I do my own book, it also keeps me in the comic book world, which, like
Sure.
I was saying, like it's a the relationship I have there are big for me. They mean a lot to me, and I want to keep nurturing them, and I want to, go to a show, once a year and see people that I, or try go to a show in the Midwest and I get to see Phil Hester. I get to hang out with Phil for a weekend. Like, how great is that, right? So
Yeah.
making my own comics keeps me in comics without constantly being like distressed of the work. And again, if I go full time freelance again, or if this opportunity falls through next week or whatever, at least I'm flexible. I want to. I'm trying to find joy in comics again, which I think I
Yeah.
lost. I think I lost for a while because I was so concerned with, how do I get this next job? How do I, so and so's late on this, so now I'm going to be late on it. Does it reflect on me? Like, I'm not the reason
Mhm.
the project's late, but the project's going in late. So if I'm the last person they talk to, then maybe it reflects on me. So to not have to worry about that for a little while might be good for my mental health.
I no, I totally agree, and I think that there's a lot of ego in play in a lot of this kind of stuff where we go, "Oh boy," like, you want to be the person who is, everyone is going, "Oh, that's the person who's doing this." Like, that's amazing. And it's very hard to be that person in, in the best of conditions. And and then you throw in other people into the mix and the publishers and their intentions, it really diminishes the opportunities for that to happen. And that's the name of the game. So I think kind of a healthy approach is looking at this and saying what is going to feel like a fulfilling, you know, outlet for you.
Yeah, and all that ties in, the convention, all that ties in. Like, sometimes I'll come
Uh-huh.
home and there'll be an issue and I'll be stressed out about it, and my wife just has to remind me, like, you don't have to do this.
Hmm.
Like, you're not contracted to do this. This could end tomorrow if you needed it to, or you know, you know, and that's another thing. It's like the comics. Like, I got to learn not to be disappointed if something doesn't work out, because it doesn't always work. It most often doesn't work out for reasons out of your control,
Yep.
and or stuff you're not willing to do. Right? Like, of course, the easy thing to do would be get some voice actors in and have a cosplay contest and do all this stuff. But I mean, I'm trying to get away from that. That's the reason I'm trying to create a show. I'm basically trying to create a convention that I would want to go to and I would want to be a guest at. That's the real.
Hmm.
And I guess it goes with comics too. These are the comics I like to read. I want to read a comic that's just fun and but not silly, but fun, but like powerful. Like, it's all self indulgent kind of nonsense. But also, being a comic book artist is self indulgent nonsense.
Well, I mean, being a creative is a selfish act because
Yeah,
you're making something that you want over if you are work for hire, you're creating something that somebody else wants. Like you don't have carte blanche
right.
when you get the call from your editor at big publisher X with very popular intelligence property character Y, and they say we need you to make a comic book. They don't hang up the phone and then expect a comic book to show up in a month. They go,
Right.
and it has to do this, that, and the other thing, and it
Right.
has to look. These characters have to be on model. Like there's none of this latitude of creating the things you want to create, and that's a really you know, that's because it's a business, it's a profession. That's what you have to do. That's the rule of that system. There ain't nothing wrong with it. It may not be what everyone wants to do, and that's totally cool. Do the thing you want to do, but don't complain that you're not getting that work.
Right.
Otherwise,
Yeah, that again, that's the thing I've had going on the last couple years, is that kind of thing. Like, oh, I have now colored a book for DC and I have colored a bigger book for Image.
hmm.
Do I want to keep pursuing that? Is that who I am? Or am I the guy who wants to work with my friends and try to make a living doing it? Or but yeah, the whole, like, yeah, the more as unfortunate as it is, the reality is the higher the page rate, the less the creative freedom you have in 99% of creative endeavors. The more money you're given to do something, the less decision making you have in that job. And yeah, and it would be this, yeah, that, I mean, again, that's why I do a convention that I run and I fund and, all this other stuff, because I am, for someone who works in comics, I am a control freak, especially for someone who just really wants to color comics. It's insane that I'm a control freak. Um, but yeah, so it all goes into that. Yeah, trying to find your joy back in whatever your creative endeavor is, and that's kind of where I'm landing the last year or so. I think I'm in a better place I have been in a while, and and I want that to show in the work. I want that to carry over into the projects I do.
Right. Well, that's good. So when's the show?
The show is March 9th. We this year, last year it was in February. Ideally, I wanted in February. But again, like I told you, there's so many events that we could only get it in March this year. Uh,
Okay.
but yeah, it's like I said, a 1 day show, Central Phoenix, centrally located, 25 professional guests, 70, well, no, 50 something plus. I guess Artist Alley. I call them creator tables. Like we don't, Artist Alley is a problematic term. So creator tables. Um, and then, a dozen or so retailers, and just kind of a fun day.
Cool. How much are tickets?
Tickets are 15 plus fees, so like comes
Okay.
out to like 16.50 or whatever. I probably should mention like the guests. We have Brian Azzarello, Stephanie Phillips, Alex Sinclair, essentially Jim Lee's colorist, Alex Sinclair, Mitch Garrett's, Tim Seeley, Tony Fleeks, doing local man for Image Comics now. Again, it's really, most of these creators I know, and I know they're fun to hang out with. Like Tony and I have had fun hanging out in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, so I know we're gonna have fun hanging out in Phoenix, Arizona. I've hung out with Tim plenty of times. I know Tim's a good dude to hang out with. So yeah, it's just should be fun. Should be a fun weekend, I hope.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, if you like comic conventions, most of them are great.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm trying not to poo poo the bigger cons in town, and they've actually been great. Like the one of the coordinators of the big show here, the Phoenix show here, volunteered at my show last year,
Oh,
you know,
very cool.
and they gave me a list of who they gave me some volunteers. And I thought there might be some friction, and since I've announced this show, like there's been no, if anything, my relationship with the local Phoenix show has gotten better. So it's, I want that. I want the everyone cheering on everybody else on. And I know it's not realistic in every opportunity, especially in business, but I do think in a creative community, if you're honestly if you're honestly focused on the creative part of the creative community, then everyone should try to be supportive as much as they can of other people, and other creators in every endeavor. If that's your thing, if your thing is money, then that's different. But
Sure.
I work in indie comics, so my thing's never been money. So
There you go.
yeah,
Right, man. I'm glad you reached out. It was it you know the it's the second most, I was the second highest form of the power move of coming on the podcast. The highest form of power move I have seen was just a comic fan who just put a post out there saying to one creator saying, when are you going to be on, and then adding me, that his podcast, and that was it. Like it was, and then the creator's like, yeah, I'm in. I'm like, oh, I guess I guess this is happening. So
right.
um I was like, okay, well, that somebody has figured out the system. They gamed
Yeah,
it worked. A plus. So but that's the hustle. You were doing the hustle, man.
yeah. I want to get the word out, and I know from checking out even before I listened to really any of your episodes, just your social media, it just seemed like a good vibe. And
Mm.
your guests, someone's guests kind of vouch for them, right? So you've had Deck on a couple times, Declan's been on a couple times, and so I was like, oh, this guy's gotta be cool. I mean, if Declan thinks he's cool, he's got to be cool, because Declan's super cool. So like,
Deck,
yeah,
deck is quite cool.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it is my portfolio, is my guest list.
yeah,
That's sort of what it comes down to, I guess, at this point. Uh, if you are in the state of Arizona and you're
yeah,
close to Phoenix, definitely go check out the show on the 9th. Even if it is just to try to charm Stephanie, then I say go for it because that's always worth it to get her to smile and laugh.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited about it. I think it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna be a fun weekend. I mean, it's what I want, man. It's all about the hang, and also fun for everybody. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll put a link for the show in the description so people can hear about it, find about it, and follow you and see if they can just, maybe next year they're going to say, you know what, next year I'm going to go to this show. So,
There you go. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. This was fun.
and we survived all our technical difficulties. So good on us.
We did. We made it happen somehow.
All right. Till next time.
All right. See ya.